The smack of the wet mop on the polished floor was the only sound, until Lieutenant Miller kicked the bucket. Grey soapy water flooded across the gleaming tiles, splashing onto the old man's worn-out boots. "Look what you've done, old man," Miller sneered. His voice was sharp, a whip in the quiet hall. Two other young officers snickered behind him. They were sharp, polished, their uniforms crisp. They looked like eagles. The old man looked like a forgotten stone. He didn't answer. He simply looked at the mess, his back slightly bent. He reached for a rag in his pocket, his movements slow, deliberate. Miller stepped forward, his own shiny black boots now in the spreading puddle. He leaned down, his face inches from the old man's. The smell of cheap soap and old wool filled his nostrils. "Are you deaf? I'm talking to you," Miller hissed. "You're a disgrace. This is a military base, not a retirement home. Clean this up, now." He poked the old man's shoulder with a single, hard finger. A push, a shove of disrespect. The old man stumbled, catching himself on the handle of his mop. He looked up, his eyes pale and grey like a winter sky, met Miller's for a single, fleeting moment. The sneer on the lieutenant's face faltered. He saw something in those eyes. Not fear, not anger. It was something ancient. Something that held the weight of forgotten battles and silent sacrifices. Then it was gone. The old man was just a janitor again. He nodded slowly, a silent acceptance. Of the humiliation, he bent his old knees, ready to clean up the mess he didn't make. The young officers laughed and walked away, their boot heels clicking with the sound of their own importance. The old man was left alone in the hall. His name was Arthur, and this was not the first time he had been treated like dirt on the very ground he had bled for. Arthur lived in a small, forgotten room in the oldest part of the base. It was a room meant for storage, but it was all he needed. A simple cot, a small wooden desk, and a single window that looked out over the training grounds. Every morning, before the first bugle call echoed through the dawn, he was awake. He would stand at that window and watch the young soldiers, shadows moving in the early light. His life was a simple loop. He cleaned the halls, the barracks, the offices. He emptied the trash. He was invisible, a ghost in a blue jumpsuit, pushing a cart of supplies. The soldiers and officers saw him, but they didn't see him. He was just part of the background, like a water fountain or a fire extinguisher. He never spoke unless spoken to. His answers were always short, polite. "Yes, sir. No, sir. Right away, sir." But there were things about him that didn't add up. The way he walked, for instance. Despite his age and his slight stoop, he moved with a quiet efficiency, a purpose. His hands, though wrinkled, were strong. They had scars. Not the nicks and scrapes of a janitor, but old, white scars that told a different story. And on the wall above his cot hung a single faded photograph in a simple frame. It showed a group of young men in old-fashioned uniforms, but the man in the center, the one whose face should have been there, had his back turned to the camera, as if he was looking toward a distant horizon only he could see. Asterisk, the days bled into one another. Each one brought a small sting of disrespect. A carelessly tossed piece of trash at his feet, a muttered insult as he cleaned a bathroom. "Move it, old-timer. Don't you have anything better to do?" Arthur absorbed it all in silence. He saw the waste, the arrogance, the lack of discipline. In some of the young officers, he saw Lieutenant Miller treat his men with contempt, shouting them down for the smallest mistakes, puffing out his chest to show off his authority. Arthur would just keep mopping, his face a mask of calm, but his eyes missed nothing. He would often find himself in the base's library, late at night, long after everyone else was gone. He wasn't cleaning. He was reading books on military strategy, on history, on leadership. The librarian, a kind woman named Sarah, once found him there. She saw him tracing the maps of old campaigns, his finger lingering on places with forgotten names. "You seem to know a lot about this stuff," she said gently. Arthur closed the book quickly. "Just an old man's hobby," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. He never went back to the library when she was there again. There were moments, small flashes, where the mask slipped. One afternoon, he was cleaning the windows outside the main training simulator. Inside, a group of cadets were failing a complex mission. Their commander was screaming at them. Arthur stopped, his rag held still, against the glass. He watched the tactical display, his brow furrowed. He muttered to himself, so quietly no one could hear. "They're forgetting the high ground. They always forget the high ground." A few minutes later, the simulated mission ended in total failure. Not everyone treated him like a ghost. A young soldier, Private Evans, always made a point to say hello. "Good morning, Arthur. How are you today?" Arthur Evans was barely 18, with kind eyes and a clumsy earnestness. He would sometimes share his coffee with Arthur in the mess hall, sitting with him while other soldiers whispered and stared. Miller noticed. He cornered Evans one day after training. "What are you doing, Evans?" Cozying up to the janitor. "Do you think that makes you look good?" "He's a nice man, sir," Evans said, standing at attention. "He's a nobody," Miller snapped. "Stay away from him, it's an order." Evans was torn. He still nodded to Arthur in the halls, but he couldn't sit with him anymore. Arthur understood. He saw the boy struggle and gave him a small, reassuring smile one morning. It was a smile that said, "It's okay, son. You keep your head down. You do your duty." The disrespect from Miller and his friends got worse. They started to make a game of it. They would accidentally spill things right after Arthur had finished cleaning. They would leave muddy boot prints on his freshly mopped floors. They would call him General, but the word was a curse, a joke. "Yes, General Mop Hand Bucket. At your command." General shined the floors. They laughed. Arthur said nothing. He just cleaned. He just worked. One evening he was in the base's memorial hall. It was the one place he felt a sliver of peace. The hall was lined with bronze plaques, each one etched with the names of soldiers from the base who had fallen in combat. He was polishing the brass railings when he stopped in front of a plaque from a war fought long ago. His hand, wrinkled and scarred, rose slowly. He traced a single name, SGT, Michael Vance, his little brother. A tear, one single tear, traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, his face hardening again. He was a stones don't cry, they just endure. He had a promise to keep. A promise he made to all the names on that wall. He was here to watch over their legacy, to see if the army they died for was still worthy of their sacrifice. And some days, he truly wondered. The news came down like a thunderclap, a full dress inspection. Not just any inspection. The Secretary of Defense himself was coming, and he was bringing General Hawthorne, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man whose reputation was legendary. The base commander, Colonel Davies, was a nervous wreck. Every corner of the base had to be perfect, every soldier, flawless. The pressure turned the base into a hornet's nest. Tempers were short, and Lieutenant Miller saw it as his chance to shine. He pushed his men harder than ever, screaming at them for the tiniest infractions. He wanted his platoon to be the model of perfection when the dignitaries arrived. 2 days before the inspection, Miller was doing a final walkthrough of his barracks. He ran a white-gloved finger along a window ledge and held it up. A tiny speck of dust. His face turned red with fury. He stormed out of the barracks and found Arthur cleaning the hallway nearby. "You," he roared, his voice echoing. "This is your fault." He dragged Arthur into the barracks and shoved the gloved finger in his face. "What is this? Do you think this is a joke? The Secretary of Defense is coming, and my barracks are filthy. Because of your incompetence." Arthur looked at the nearly invisible speck of dust. Then he looked at Miller. "I will clean it again, sir." "You're damn right you will," Miller shouted. Soldiers had gathered at the doors, watching. "You're a useless old relic. You're lucky you even have a job. One more mistake, and I will personally throw you off this base myself. Do you understand me?" Arthur held the lieutenant's gaze. The air crackled. For a moment it seemed the old man would finally break, that he would finally say something, but he didn't. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I understand, sir." The humiliation was complete. Private Evans watched from the back, his fists clenched, his heart aching. He wanted to scream. He wanted to defend the old man who had shown him more quiet dignity than any officer. But he was a private, and that was a lieutenant. He was powerless. The day of the inspection arrived. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Black cars, sleek and official, rolled through the main gate. Colonel Davies, sweating in his dress uniform, met the delegation on the main steps. The Secretary of Defense, a stern-looking man in a dark suit, stepped out followed by General Hawthorne. Hawthorne was everything a general should be. Tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. His chest was a constellation of medals. His presence alone made every soldier stand a little straighter. The tour began. Colonel Davies nervously pointed out the base's features, the state-of-the-art training facilities, the pristine mess hall, the perfectly manicured grounds. Everything was going smoothly. Miller's platoon was standing in perfect formation as they passed, and he beamed with pride. He thought he had done it. He thought he had won. The delegation was walking down the main administrative hallway, the one that led past the memorial hall. It was the last stop on the tour, and that's when they saw him. Arthur was mopping the floor. He was moving slowly, carefully, making sure not to miss a single spot. He was trying to stay out of the way, to be invisible. But Miller saw him, and all his rage, his arrogance, his need to impress. It all boiled over. He saw the old janitor as the one final imperfection in his perfect day. He broke formation and strode toward Arthur. "I thought I told you to stay out of sight," he hissed, his voice low but vicious. "Get out of the way, old man. The general is coming through." To make his point, he shoved Arthur hard. The mop clattered to the floor. The old man stumbled backward, his arms windmilling as he fought to keep his balance. He was going to fall. Time seemed to slow down. The clatter of the mop echoed like a gunshot. Colonel Davies' face went pale. The Secretary of Defense stopped in his tracks, a look of confusion on his face. But General Hawthorne froze. His eyes, those sharp, piercing eyes, were locked on the stumbling janitor. His mouth fell slightly open. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a look of utter, profound shock. And then, reverence. He ignored everyone. He ignored the secretary. He ignored the trembling colonel. He walked forward, his steps slow, measured, as if he were approaching a sacred place. He walked past the furious Lieutenant Miller as if he wasn't even there. He reached the old janitor just as Arthur regained his footing. The general, the most powerful military man in the country, stood before the humble janitor. The silence in the hall was absolute. You could hear a pin drop, and General Hawthorne did something no one had ever seen him do. He snapped to the most rigid, most perfect salute of his entire life. His hand trembled slightly at his brow. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion. It cracked. "General Vance," he said, his voice a choked whisper. "Sir, my God, sir, it's you." The name hung in the air. Vance. Lieutenant Miller's jaw dropped. His mind reeled. Vance, it couldn't be. General Arthur Vance, the legendary ghost general from the history books. The architect of their entire modern army. The hero who had vanished from public life 30 years ago. The man, this very base, was named after Fort Vance. It was impossible. Arthur looked at the four-star general saluting him. A long moment passed. Then, slowly, painfully, he straightened his back. The stoop from years of mopping and quiet humility vanished. He stood tall, ramrod straight. The janitor was gone. In his place stood a commander. The old, tired eyes were suddenly blazing with a fire that had commanded armies. He looked at Hawthorne and gave a small, sad smile. He raised a hand, not to salute back, but in a gesture of gentle dismissal. "At ease, Marcus," Arthur Vance said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of command. "It's been a long time." General Hawthorne lowered his hand, his eyes shining. "Sir, we thought you were, ... We didn't know." Colonel Davies looked like he was about to faint. He stumbled forward. "General Vance, sir, I had no idea. I am so sorry." But Vance's eyes were not on him. They were on Lieutenant Miller. Miller was frozen, his face the color of ash. He was shaking, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He understood now. He hadn't just shoved a janitor. He had assaulted a living legend. He had disrespected the very soul of the army he swore to serve. General Vance walked slowly toward Miller. He stopped right in front of him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet disappointment in his eyes was more devastating than any shout could ever be. "The uniform doesn't grant you respect," Lieutenant Vance said, his voice calm and cold as steel. "It demands that you give it. You disrespected not just me, but every soldier who has ever served. You disrespected the man who mops the floors, the man who cooks the food, the man who signs the paychecks. You failed to understand that an army is a body, and every part is vital." He paused, and his gaze drifted toward the memorial hall at the end of the corridor. "You dishonored the men on that wall. Men who died for the idea that we are all equal in our service." He looked back at Miller. "You are not fit to lead." The fallout was immediate. Lieutenant Miller was officially and publicly stripped of his commission. His career was over. Colonel Davies offered his resignation, but General Vance refused it. "Your lesson has been learned, Colonel," he said. "Now, make sure it is taught." The story of the janitor who was a general spread through the base like wildfire, then through the entire military. It became a legend, a cautionary tale, a lesson in humility. People asked why. Why would a man like Arthur Vance, a hero, a legend, choose a life of anonymity and hard labor? The answer was simple, and yet profound. When he retired, he felt a hollowness. He had built an army, but he had lost touch with the soldier. He felt the ghosts of the men he had lost, the names on the wall, calling to him. He didn't want parades or statues. He wanted to come back to the beginning, to the place where it all mattered. He took the job as a janitor not as a punishment, but as a pilgrimage. He wanted to serve in the most humble way possible. He wanted to watch over the young soldiers, to feel the heartbeat of the institution. He had dedicated his life to here, wanted to see if the values he fought for, honor, courage, and above all, respect, were still alive. In the arrogance of Miller, he saw that the army was in danger of forgetting, but in the simple kindness of Private Evans, he saw that its heart was still beating strong. A week later, General Vance was no longer wearing a janitor's jumpsuit. He was in his old, decorated uniform, standing beside Private Evans on an observation deck, watching the sunrise over the training grounds. He placed a hand on the young soldier's shoulder. "The strength of an army isn't in its weapons," the old general said, his voice full of a lifetime of wisdom. "It's in its heart. It's in how we treat each other, especially those who we think have nothing to offer." He had come looking for the soul of his army, and in the end, he had reminded them where to find it, not in the rank on a shoulder or the medals on a chest, but in the quiet dignity of a person's character. The world is full of heroes hiding in plain sight. They are the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones who ask for nothing in return. They are our veterans, our elders, the people who serve without a uniform. If this story reminds you to look at every person with the respect they deserve, then our mission here is accomplished. Show your respect for the legacy of General Vance and all the quiet heroes like him by hitting that like button. And subscribe for more stories that honor the values that truly matter. And share this video to spread the message that true strength is found in humility, and real heroes don't always need a title.